कौन सी?
Yeah, Gaurav, am I audible?
Yeah.
Gaurav, please make me the host.
Just a minute.
And is there a waiting room for participants?
Wait. Okay. Hello, Taina.
Yes.
You are the host.
Great.
Now.
Thank you.
I'm leaving. Okay.
Hi.
Hi, ma'am. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, perfect. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, hi, Diva.
Hi. How are you?
Very well.
1 second, I have a problem. My computer is giving. There's a sound in my computer, no? Can I? Okay. Somebody say something. I can't make out whether I'm hearing through my.
Can you hear?
Hi. Yeah, we can.
It's my computer where the sound is coming, not mine. No, it's. I can hear both times round. I want to connect my earphones and not my computer.
Ma'am, are you comfortable now?
Yeah, all good.
Okay. So just 2 more minutes. We have about 15 of us. Just 2 more minutes. We let other people log in and then we could start.
Sure. We'll put our cameras off then.
Yeah, and meanwhile, I could give you screen sharing rights.
Yes, thanks.
It's now with you, yeah.
No. I can't hear anything.
Okay. I just request the speakers and myself to be on video. Rest everybody could have their videos off, please. Yeah. Still have people joining in. Just a second. Okay. Okay. Okay, so I think we could begin. So, hi, good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible? Yeah. All right. So we are 30 of us here, and I would begin first by thanking our esteemed panelists. We are we have a proud association with Fides Law Chambers. To introduce them, Fides Law Chambers is a boutique intellectual property rights law firm which was established in 2008. And it is my privilege and honor to introduce our panelist speakers. We first have Shweta Sri Majumdar. She is managing partner at Fides Law Chambers. Ma'am stands elected to the board of directors in INTA. She was ranked in the A list of top 100 lawyers in India by the Indian Business Law Journal. The World Intellectual Property Review names her as one of the 80 most influential women in IP in the world. And the World Trademark Review identifies her as a global leader among trademark lawyers worldwide. We're also joined by Diva, Ms. Diva Arora. She's a partner with Fides Law Chambers. She has a vast experience in IP protection, strategy, and enforcement, and has represented clients in diverse civil and criminal litigations, commercial arbitrations, contract and property claims, as also IP disputes, and has appeared before a variety of judicial and administrative forums in India. Thank you both for taking out your valuable time for all of us here. We are joined here by representatives from our centers and of course our MSET startup community. So our topic for discussion today is the budget 2021 and its implications for the startup community. Over to you, Shweta Sri.
Thank you so much, Taina. Diva and I are delighted to be here today, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to hand over to Diva, who's going to be the first speaker.
Thank you, Tanya, for that kind introduction. So let me start by giving you a broad overview of the Union Budget 2021-22. Now, the 2021 budget rests on 6 pillars. First, health and well-being, physical and financial capital infrastructure, inclusive development for aspirational India, reinvigorating human capital, innovation and research and development, and lastly, minimum government and maximum governance. Hailed as the most crucial budget of India in recent years, the Union Budget 2021-22 has come in the backdrop of the largest GDP contraction that India has suffered post-independence due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In a significant departure from the tradition, the budget this year was not printed and was entirely digital. So let's look at some of the salient features and the sector-wise impact in the form of some slides that we have put together for you. So as you can see, this is the percentage allocation of funds in some of the key sectors and accounts for about 41% of the budget. Although not a major allocation in percentage terms, our proposed healthcare spend is predictably much higher. Now, if you would have seen, there's only 2.41% that has been allocated for health, but the health spending has increased this year by 135%, and out of this, 35,000 crore has been set aside for the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, which is extremely crucial, being that we all are emerging and coming out of the COVID pandemic. Swachh Bharat continues to be a priority, as well also as several new infrastructure projects, as you can see. The proposed privatization of public sector banks is likely to create several disruptive and challenging opportunities in the fintech space, which continues to be one of the most promising and important sector for startups. There is also a proposal to disinvest LIC, and the proposed IPO slated for later this year will be an important event to watch. Other announcements in the budget have included a slew of hikes in custom duties to benefit Make in India, a push in the textile industry, and a new cess on the agriculture development. In significant changes to the taxation process, the finance minister announced scrapping of ITRs for senior citizens having pension and interest income only, new rules for removal of double taxation of NRIs, and a reduction in the time period of tax assessment, among other measures. Now, earlier, the threshold limit for tax audit for a person carrying on business was increased from 1 crore to 5 crores in order to promote digital economy and to further reduce the compliances for SMMEs. This threshold has now been increased from 5 crores to 10 crores. Special provisions have also been visualized to provide higher rate of TDS, TCS for non-filers of income tax return. Now, over to my colleague Shweta Shri for an insight of what this budget means for startups.
Thank you, Diva. And so I think as far as I'm concerned, the way I look at it is that while the pandemic has adversely hit most traditional businesses and the GDP has, of course, plunged, Indian startups have actually seen a dramatic increase in interest in this period. They've reported a total funding of about 11.5 billion in the pandemic year. Just requesting everyone to keep their mics on mute, please. 2020 has also seen the most unicorns in a calendar year, as 11 startups have reached a total valuation of $1 billion plus. Sorry, we'll have to.
Sorry, yes, just I think there is. Everybody, please have their mics on. This is a request.
Vandana Singh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So coming back to what we've been seeing. So there are about 11 startups that have reached a valuation of 1 billion plus. And interestingly, as of December 2020, even in terms of government recognized startups, some of the figures are to the extent that there are 41,000 plus government recognized startups in India as of December, and 39,000 among them account for over 4.7 lakh jobs. So this is the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. So what does this budget mean for you? Obviously, you're a very important stakeholder from the point of view of the budget. So if you are an eligible startup that has been incorporated between 1st of April 2016 to 31st of March 2021, what you had in the earlier law was a 100% tax exemption on 3 years out of the first 10 years in which you do business. So that is, of course, assuming your turnover does not exceed 100 crores. This is something that has been extended up to 31st of March 2022. So in other words, if you are a startup that has been incorporated up to 31st of March 2022 within a 10-year period, so that would be until 31st March 2032, you can claim 3 years of tax exemption. Second, you can claim exemption on long-term capital gains if a part or whole of it is invested in a fund notified by the government within 6 months of the capital gains. Now, what happens is that when a startup is getting funding, for example, that usually happens in the form of capital gains, and that funding would typically be then taxed. But today what happens is up to the host is muted me. Okay, sorry. Now, if you have up to a ceiling limit of about 50 lakhs, if you invest it in a specified fund of the government and you keep that money in the fund for a period of about 3 years and you don't withdraw it, then you can get a tax exemption for that funding amount. Sometimes you bring in money into a startup which is above the fair market value, which is the market value that, say, your CA would determine. So even if you're bringing in funding, if say, a family member or an angel investor, or funds that are not even registered as venture capital funds, if that is bringing in investment into your startup, which is seen to be investment above fair market value, typically that would have been taxed. That is now not going to be taxed. The other is the long-term capital gains on the sales of residential property. Now, this is a very interesting provision because typically what would happen is that, there is one particular ecosystem of investors, the typical investors who would invest in a startup. But now what is happening is that the budget has allowed, in the context of, say, residential properties, say a Hindu undivided family, an individual selling a residential property, they would obviously have to pay capital gains tax. They can save that capital gains tax if those gains are invested in a startup. So earlier on, that was limited only to SMEs. Now the definition has been expanded to include startups. So if, say, a member of an HUF invested their capital gains in a startup, they would get a tax exemption. So effectively what we're doing is we're broadening the base of people who could potentially be investors in startups. So that's obviously good for the growth and expansion of startups. Of course, apart from this, there are several other startup-focused measures, simplifying regulations, income tax exemptions. There is a 10,000 crore fund that has been set up by SIDBI. Now, one of the things you must be hearing a lot about in the news is the one-person company. It's not something that the new budget has come up with for the first time. It existed. It was there brought in by amendment to our company law in 2013. The idea of a one-person company, as the name suggests, is that it's a company which has only one person as a member. It's a revolutionary concept because you're saying that, not everyone who has a great idea and wants to take it to market needs to have, an association of persons coming together to be able to form a company to, commercialize that idea. But currently, the difference between what the laws in relation to one-person company as it stands now and what is proposed is that currently the laws provide that, first of all, a one-person company cannot convert itself into a private company or a public company within the first 2 years of its incorporation. However, if the paid-up share capital of a one-person company exceeds 50 lakhs or its annual turnover during that period of 2 years exceeds 2 crores, then they have to be mandatorily converted to a private limited company. Now, in the new budget, both these caps have been removed altogether. So irrespective of how much investment you get, irrespective of what your turnover is, if you are a one-person company, you can continue to remain a one-person company. You don't have to mandatorily convert to a private limited company. This essentially means that there is no limit to the funding that the company can receive without the pressure of conversion. Why is it important? The other important thing to remember is that the eligibility criteria has also been changed. Earlier on, to be, to incorporate a one-person company, you would have to be somebody who was an Indian resident. So an NRI, for example, by definition, a non-resident Indian is someone who hasn't spent more than 182 days in India. So you would have to be in India for 182 days to qualify as an Indian resident. And if you weren't an Indian resident, you could not incorporate a one-person company. Today, how the law has changed is that you need a minimum residence in India of 120 days. However, you are still an NRI under the Income Tax Act purposes if you haven't been in India for 182 days, right? So even if you spent a minimum of 120 days in India and you are an NRI and your income is being taxed outside the country, you can still incorporate a one-person company in India. So that obviously is a huge advantage because you've opened up this whole new class of foreign investors who can come in, non-resident Indians can come in and operate OPCs in India. And the advantage of an OPC obviously is that its identity is different. So for example, if you were a sole proprietorship company, then all the liabilities of the company are your liabilities, both civil and criminal. Whereas the OPC's identity is distinct from its owner. So the owner is never sued. It is the company that will be sued. Then, of course, there's limited liability. So your personal assets are safe. They remain protected in the case of a default. And also you can raise equity funding, you'd be eligible for government grants, etc. Earlier on, it didn't take off because of all of these constraints. And also the other important constraint that was there earlier, which has been removed now, are potential criminal liabilities of the director or the person who incorporates the one-person company. These amendments make it an attractive proposition, and I'm going to hand over to Diva again now to talk to you a little bit about the removal of criminal liabilities of directors in the law. Over to you, Diva.
Thank you. So in order to facilitate the ease of doing business in India, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has sought to decriminalize certain provisions of the Companies Act. There is a proposal to make 9 offences dealing with non-compliance, which can be heard by the National Company Law Tribunal in regard to, firstly, the winding up of the companies, correcting the register of security holders, and redemption of debentures. This measure aims not only to remove such offences which have already been specifically stated in specific legislations, but also to avoid conflict of jurisdiction. The Company Amendment Bill also proposes to convert the imprisonment prescribed for 23 compoundable offences into civil wrongs and change the fines imposed under these offences from that of a criminal nature into penalties of a civil nature. Now, the proposal to remove imprisonment as a form of punishment for non-compliance will reduce the investors' fear, especially foreign investors, and enhance doing business in India. The Company Amendment Bill also proposes for certain offences, for example, non-compliance with related party transactions, for which imprisonment has been removed, the penalties to be charged will be enhanced. Now, this enhancement aims to ensure that despite omitting imprisonment, the penalty itself will act as a deterrent so as to avoid such offences from taking place. The Company Amendment Bill 2020 also proposes to reduce the quantum of monetary penalty associated with 22 offences. The bill proposes to change the nature of the monetary levy in each of these cases from a criminal fine into a civil penalty. Now, the amount imposed as a penalty for non-compliance has been enhanced or reduced. In certain cases where imprisonment has been removed, the penalty has been enhanced so that it still deters violators. However, in certain cases, for example, with regard to maintenance of records, failure of certain compliances before the registrar of companies, or the failure to comply with annual filing return, the penalty has been reduced. Now, when deciding the penalty amount under an offense, the bill also takes into the type of company into consideration. So, for instance, if the non-compliance occurs with a one-person company or with a startup company, then the penalty has been halved. A maximum limit of rupees 2 lakhs has been stated for such companies. So that is the maximum amount that can be imposed as a penalty for these companies. This process of altering the penalty amount for such companies will also enhance and promote the establishment of such companies, as penalties are being awarded in accordance with the capacity, and therefore their interests are being safeguarded. Additionally, certain civil offences that are compoundable in nature, for example, your statutory invoices not being issued or disclosure obligations have not been complied with, will be tried before an in-house adjudication mechanism rather than a court. So this is a new mechanism that has been introduced. The in-house adjudicating mechanism will be headed by will be headed by an adjudicating officer. Now, if the parties agreed by the order of the adjudicating officer's decision, then the party can appeal before the regional director. This mechanism will allow the parties to obtain justice in a more efficiently manner, as it provides for an alternative mechanism for the resolution of a dispute without approaching the court. So as you can see that these proposed measures will ensure that the disputes are resolved in a more liberal manner compared to the existing measures which impose criminal liability. Further, these measures aim to decriminalize the Companies Act so as to increase foreign investment and enhance doing business in India. Now, similarly, a similar thing has also been introduced in the Limited Liability Partnership Act. The Corporate Affairs Ministry also plans to decriminalize 12 offenses as well as omit a provision entailing criminal liability under the Limited Liability Act for greater ease of doing business for law-abiding LLPs in situations where no malified intentions are involved. So offenses that relate to minor or less serious compliance issues involving predominantly determinations are proposed to be shifted to in-house adjudication mechanism framework, which is the IAM framework, instead of being treated as criminal offenses. So 12 decriminalized offenses would then get shifted to the IAM framework, thereby declogging the criminal codes. Further, certain offenses that are being dealt under specific legislations that are being proposed to be omitted from the LLP Act completely. Again, for the same reasons that we saw under the Companies Act, so that there is no duplication and there is no conflict with respect to jurisdiction. Another proposal that this budget has introduced is the revision of the definition of the small companies. Now, the definition of small-scale industries is changed by increasing the threshold for the paid-up capital from not exceeding 50 lakhs to not exceeding 2 crores, and the turnover from not exceeding 2 crores to not exceeding 20 crores. Now, as you can see, this move is expected to benefit over 2 lakh companies, like our finance minister said, because these companies will have ease in complying with the requirements. So it is likely to get more companies under the SSI category and benefit them in terms of compliance requirements, such as fewer number of mandatory board meetings, rotation of statutory auditors, exemption from the preparation of cash flow statements, thereby facilitating the ease of doing business in India. Now, an interesting fact is that an SSI is already a priority creditor under the Delayed Payment Monitoring System, or the MSME Samadhan, which was launched in the year 2017. So under this scheme, all registered MSMEs dues have to be paid up within a period of 90 days. So this is a clear advantage that has been given to the MSMEs. Now, let's look at some of the legislative changes in the GST. So the mandatory requirement of getting annual accounts audited and reconciliation statements submitted by a CA have been completely done away with. So earlier, taxpayers were required to upload a copy of the audited annual account and reconciliation statement certified by a CA or a CMA. Now, a self-certified reconciliation statement can be uploaded along with the audited annual financial statement. Earlier, input tax credit was allowed only if details were uploaded by a supplier. Now, one more condition has been inserted, which provides that the taxpayers are entitled to avail the input tax credit on purchase invoice only if the supplier has uploaded the invoice on the GST portal. So the onus is also on the supplier to upload the invoice, without which they will not be able to avail the input tax credit. With respect to the interest on net liability, the provision on interest on net liability is being amended retrospectively from 1st July 2017 so as to charge interest on net cash liability. The CGST Act is being amended so as to make seizure and confiscation of goods and conveyances in transit a separate proceeding from recovery of tax. So in simple words, earlier, the only remedy that was available in case that any person who was registered evaded paying tax or had defaulted was recovery of tax. But now the tax officials who you see standing on the road, if they find that the tax has not been paid on the invoice, then they have the power to confiscate the goods. So this is an additional remedy that has been provided to the tax authority. Then Section 16 of the IGST Act has also been amended so as to zero rate the supply of goods or services to a special economic zone developer or a special economic zone unit only when the said supply is for authorized operations. So authorized operations is the amendment that has been made. Secondly, link the foreign exchange remittance in case of export of goods with refund. Earlier, what used to happen was that once the person had exported the goods, he could claim a refund. But now that has been amended to say that even though the person has exported the goods, till the time the payment does not come and the bank does not realizes it, the refund will not be processed. So these were some of the legislative changes that have been introduced in the GST. Now I'll hand it over to Shweta Shri again so that she can take you through the Startup India Fund Scheme.
Thank you, Diva. So I want to talk a little bit about the Startup India Seed Fund Scheme. I don't know if you're familiar with that. This is something, how much time do we have, Tina? Do we have about 10 minutes? Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, no, we have another 20 minutes. There's no problem.
Okay, all right, perfect. So as far as the Startup India Seed Fund Scheme is concerned, now this is something that was created to provide financial assistance to startups. Provided you're able to show a proof of concept, you have a prototype, you have certain product trials, and you have the ability to demonstrate, you're able to demonstrate your ability for market entry and commercialization. So this fund has been created to provide financial assistance to startups. There is a corpus of 945 crores that have been set aside to be disbursed to potentially 3,600 entrepreneurs through 300 incubators across India in the next 4 years. The scheme will be implemented very shortly. What's interesting is that while the scheme is sector agnostic from the point of view of a startup, it's important to note that there are certain preferred sectors. So if you're working in those preferred sectors, you will be at a slight disadvantage to claim an entitlement to the disbursements under the scheme. What are these sectors? Social impact, waste management, water management, financial inclusion, education, agriculture, food processing, biotechnology, healthcare, energy, mobility, defense, space, railways, oil and gas, textiles. So how the process works is that online applications will be invited from incubators across India who will participate in the scheme. And you could get a grant up to 5 crores to a selected incubator in milestone-based installments. So you would get up to 20 lakhs as a grant for validation of proof of concept or prototype development or product trials, and up to 50 lakhs of investment for market entry, commercialization, or scaling up, provided you were scaling up through convertible debentures or debt-linked instruments. The second thing I want to talk about is, in terms of these schemes and funds, is about the National Research Foundation. So the finance minister spoke about, as Diva said at the beginning, innovation and R&D being one of the most important 6 pillars of the budget. So there were several measures that were unveiled to strengthen the public research and innovation ecosystem. 50,000 crores have been. Sorry, we need someone to mute their mic. Yes. So 50,000 crores have been allocated in the budget for the National Research Foundation, which is going to be spent over a period of 5 years. Now, the National Research Foundation is an autonomous body that has been envisaged under the New Education Policy 2020. It's an umbrella body that is expected to fund, mentor, and build quality of research across a range of disciplines. There are two things that are important to consider in relation to the National Research Foundation. One is the fact that it expands the sort of promotion of research into the traditional science areas and beyond the traditional science areas into areas of humanities. So arts, education, all of these are also going to be looked at. The second thing is that, I mean, obviously, in doing that, it's going to be tasked with seeding and building research capacity at universities and colleges. And we all know that lack of fund allocation is one of the biggest reasons that have been cited for lack of researchers in India. So this is meant to cater to that. What's also interesting is that this is meant to be available in 12 regional languages. So it's looking at promoting research in regional languages over and above research in English. And so in order to ensure increased participation in the research, there's going to be career counseling in schools, promoting research at universities, inclusion of research and internships in the undergraduate curriculum. And in fact, what our finance minister said is that the NRF is meant to provide a reliable base of merit-based but equitable peer-reviewed research funding, which will help to develop a culture of research in the country through suitable incentives. So what we see in conclusion is that there is clearly a push towards innovation and research and development, although the allocation towards education has been lowered by 6.1%. So there's a 6,000 crore plus reduction in the allocation towards education. Now, this is obviously going to have a direct impact on many students who have little access to online education and who may have dropped out of schools because of the pandemic. And that's being written about a fair bit. So interestingly, on one hand, you have that and the lack of access to education that everyone's writing about. But on the other hand, in the same period, what has happened is that the edutech industry has seen an immense spurt of growth. So there are 4,400 edutech startups that are currently operating. They have had a 120% growth in the pandemic year. The industry is expected to reach a valuation of $1.7 billion by 31st March 2021. So given the fact that the finance minister spoke in the budget about qualitative strengthening of 15,000 schools to create model institutions under the national education policy, I think this is a great opportunity for edtech startups to find innovative ways to reach children whose education has been adversely impacted by the pandemic. The other interesting area, fintech, of course, has always been an area of much sort of interest and has always been a front runner as far as startups are concerned. So in terms of, again, metrics and numbers, because they tell the story much better than dry facts. And in terms of, if you look at metrics, UPI transactions have witnessed a continuous rise. There have been 2.3 billion transactions in January alone. So to give a further boost to digital transactions, the budget has earmarked 1,500 crores for a proposed scheme that will provide financial incentive to promote digital payment. So it's important to keep that in mind if you're in the fintech space, that innovative ways in which you can promote digital India in terms of and if you link that to the privatization of the banks, it's obvious that fintech as a space is going to see a fair bit of disruption, as Deva said earlier. INR 3,768 crores have also been set aside. Now, this is going to be a new event that's going to happen shortly. It's going to happen this year. It's going to be rolled out. And that is our digital census. It's a one-of-a-kind, very ambitious project. And so therefore, there's a 3,700 crore outlay for it. It's going to be in 16 languages. And the data is planned to be used in the future planning of the country, especially in development initiatives and welfare schemes through people's participation. The push towards multilingual data collection is clearly going to be an important prong for startups in this space. And all the startups, anyone who's listening in here, who's working in multilingual spaces of data collection, do be mindful of the up and coming personal data protection laws that are going to also come into play for anyone who is in this business, because when you're designing those technology solutions in this space, you have to keep that in mind. The other area is, of course, health tech, which again is major, and post the pandemic, there's increased attention as far as telemedicine and health tech solutions are concerned. So the National Digital Health Mission, it starts with an initial budget of 470 crores. It's attempting to streamline the digital health ecosystem. So telemedicine in health and wellness centers, they've already been rolled out in 12 states. There are about 70 plus doctor hubs that have been created. 1 lakh plus consultations have already been provided, and 12,000 professionals are trained. The idea is that you're providing these telemedicine hubs in rural places which don't have access to really good doctors. And through these telemedicine hubs, there's a doctor to doctor interaction with, city doctors whenever they need consultation or they need advice, so that, you're making the same healthcare available in the villages without needing someone to physically travel from the city. So those are great ideas there. And that's a critical sector for startups to focus. And, we're likely to see a strong policy and budgetary push in this area in the near future. And since we are in a mighty event, I will take this opportunity to remind you that there is a JanCare Innovation Challenge on the Mighty Startup Hub. I saw that it asks potential contestants to reimagine healthcare delivery in low resource settings. And that competition is open until the 15th of February. So put on your thinking caps if you haven't already. And finally, I do want to say that, there is so much to talk about as far as the budget is concerned in terms of allocation. But at the end of the day, we are intellectual property and technology lawyers. So we always look at it through the lens of what it means for the businesses we serve and what it means for your ecosystem in terms of, A, what are the areas you should be focusing on? What are the things you should be doing smartly? And what are the loopholes and, potholes to evade on this journey? So I do hope that our conversation so far has given you some ideas in those areas. We're not tax experts. We won't be able to, tell you about what's the rights and, the rights and wrongs in terms of your tax planning. But we do hope you've got some ideas out of what we presented to you today. Thank you, and over to you, Diana.
Yes, thank you, Shweta, Sri, and Diva. This was really insightful. I think the floor can now be open to Q&A. Participants are free to either raise questions, or you could probably just message them to me, and one by one we start taking them on. Do we have questions?
Well, you know what they say.
Yeah.
Either you've clarified everybody's doubts on the subject, or no one was listening to you. It's either of the two. And
I know, I can see that. I can see that.
It could be the latter.
Right. So I actually had a slightly different observation to make. So when we compare, budget 21 to budget 20, and we've gone through a year where we've been witnessed a pandemic which has impacted every sector of our operations. So vis-a-vis startups. So if I have to, in a crystal clear form, put forward the comparison between budget 20 and 21 with respect to the pandemic, how important or crucial has this pandemic, as a role this pandemic has played on the technology and startup sector?
So I'll answer that in two ways.
Yeah.
The first part, I will say in terms of how the pandemic has changed traditional ways of looking at business. And reconciling what I said at the beginning to say, why is it that startups have not been hit by the pandemic, but larger businesses have been, and business bottom lines have been so badly impacted by the pandemic?
Right.
So I think one of the things it teaches you is that even traditional businesses or people who did not think about using technology as a tool were compelled to embrace technology.
Right.
So startups were already there in the sense of providing agile solutions, which traditional bricks and mortar companies could not adapt to, agile solutions. So to give you an example, one of the spaces in which startups did incredibly well is the simple restaurant delivery services, right? So startups which were in the space of, the end-to-end, services in a restaurant. So when it comes to online booking of a seat in a restaurant, going into the restaurant, doing an, ordering from the menu, and then paying. So if you have an end-to-end digital solution, that's a great solution in a restaurant, which a restaurant may not have embraced earlier.
Right.
Or, your ticketing, hotel booking, all of these things. The fact that contactless became a thing, it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the pandemic. So a lot of the digital technology solution providers found that there was a scrambling among VCs to acquire them at this point. The valuations went through the roof. So that's obviously a good sign.
Yes, that's a right example. So we do have somebody who's raised a query, Shweta Sri. So
Mhm.
it is that regarding the LTCG exemption for residential property if invested in startups, does this apply in cases where startup founders are also the owner of the residential property?
That's an interesting question. It's something we'll have to look at because the amendment has not come into play yet. How
Okay.
it will, how it, as far as it'll, there are two things. One is if the startup is a company in itself, then the founder's identity doesn't matter.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
But how it's going to play out in case of, say, a one-person company, or if it's a sole proprietorship, then
Right.
would your capital gains tax? I don't think that will make a difference. It shouldn't
Okay.
make a difference because at the end of the day, say if you're looking at an HUF kind of situation where you're paying tax on your capital gains on account of the money that you as an HUF have acquired because you've sold your residential property. If you're putting that into the startup as an investment, that shouldn't make a difference. The fact that you have it's your own startup, it shouldn't make a difference as long as both are eligible. I don't think it'll make a difference, but we'll have to see how the law how the amendment looks.
Right, right. So I hope that answers your query. The other one is that is there any framework for a startup to apply for Startup India or the SIDBI fund? Is there a sort of a framework or mechanism in place?
Yes, so that's available online. You should look at that online. And so even in terms of getting registered as an MSME, there is a framework that is provided online. And for the SIDBI fund, I don't have the framework available handy with me. But Diva, I mean, did you have something to add on that?
No, I just wanted to add that there, once you register yourself as a startup or a MSME, you are you are entitled to certain additional benefits. So, for example, with respect to if you're going for IP protection, then once you're registered, then your fees is half. So you get special benefits once you register. So there is a provision online to register, and you are issued a startup company certificate, which you can avail. And the process is fairly simple. You have to go online, answer a few questions, and even MSME has a website online. If you want to register with MSME as a small scale industry, or you can do that. Just log into the website, you fill up a form, and you can register yourself and avail those benefits.
Right, right. Thanks, Diva. We can probably take on one question if that's okay with both of you. One more question. It is that could you please briefly expand on any special provisions or benefits available to women-led founded startups with respect to now the budget? Is there any sort of special provision or benefit that has been provided to women-led startups?
Sure. So, I mean, again, as far as this particular, sort of budget, I don't know if there is anything specially provided here, but there are a bunch of schemes that exist already for women entrepreneurs. So, for example, there is the Annapurna scheme, which gives loans up to 50,000 rupees for women to set up catering businesses. Then there's the Stree Shakti scheme, which gives certain loans. Then there is the Udyogini scheme, which gives lower interest rates. So these are all meant for women entrepreneurs. Then there is, there are all these yojanas. I mean, most of them are, of course, targeting rural development, but there's also the Bharatiya Mahila Bank. So if you were an entrepreneur, a startup which is primarily women run, then you would be able to get collateral free loans. And I know that is something that is even MSMEs are eligible and not just entrepreneurs.
Right.
So up to 1 crore and financial assistance up to 20 crores is something that you could get from the Bharatiya Mahila Bank. And apart from that, there are also, there are all kinds of, for example, there's TREAD, which is the Entrepreneurship Assistance and Development Scheme of the government, which gives finance to women held startups along with training and counseling in different matters. Apart from this, there are, of course, policies and subsidies. So it will depend on, where you are, which state you are. So there are different state subsidies as well. The Niti Aayog is also, I think they have a woman entrepreneurship platform that the Niti Aayog has, for exchange of ideas and to give assistance to women-led startups. So that's also something I know Niti Aayog has some schemes for women. So these are all, I mean, again, it's very similar to the Mighty Startup Hub in the sense that, if you're a woman entrepreneur, then you could enroll there and you would get, guidance and assistance and stuff like that.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. And I think we could wrap this up. We are a little past our time. I thank all the participants who participated today, and a special vote of thanks to Ms. Majumdar and Ms. Arora. You've taken out your valuable time for us, and MSH is very proud to have you on board as our partner. And please, for all updates, please follow MeitiStartupHub.in. We also have our social media handles, and please follow us for all regular updates on the tech startup ecosystem. And we sign off with our MSH motto: innovate, connect, collaborate. Let's make technology transform and integrate. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
so
much.
much. Thank you.